Welcome to the Meez Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse.
My guest today is the VP of Culinary Innovation at Shake Shack, leading R&D, menu development, and chef collaborations for the brand, John Karangis. Prior to Shake Shack, John spent 7 years running Danny Meyer's Union Square events, and he also ran the kitchens at Goldman Sachs prior to that, and he spent a lot of his career working for Danny, his first gig being at Union Square Cafe almost 20 years ago, and then on the opening team of Gramercy Tavern with Tom Clicchio. And aside from being obviously a pro in the kitchen, John's also a competitive triathlete. We talk a lot about how he weaves exercise and competition into his life, balanced with work and family. He's a father of 3. And obviously we dig really deep into the process of R&D and innovation at Shake Shack, how that works, how new menu items get launched, how they get tested, what works, what doesn't. We spend a lot of time as well talking about good food at scale. I mean, the food that John was putting out at Union Square events was just of the highest caliber. And I'm talking about like thousands of plates at a time. And somehow he figured out how to do it. He gives one tip about the use of bandsaws that I thought was pretty surprising and cool. John's been a friend for a while, and it was just good to catch up with him and learn a little bit more about the job that he's doing now at Shake Shack. So as always, I hope you enjoy as much as I did.
Galleries, no salaries, mentality just wired. Ink for the page and God is the supplier. Honestly, I'm tired of promises from liars. My mama says I'm talented, imagine I require. My heart's only desire, create art you acquire. Acquire all I need.
Welcome to the podcast. Good to see you again.
Same here.
I'm sorry we couldn't do it in person, but we are going to come visit the facility soon. So I think most people probably know your background. I'm going to tee you up a little bit, but maybe, just because of we'll do the whole thing. Obviously, you worked at Union Square Cafe. Before that, you worked in Paris for a long time. You spent a bunch of time at Union Square events. You're now at Shake Shack, but maybe just fill in the blanks a little bit if there's anything else that you want to share about your background, other than, of course, what we're going to talk about, which is that you're this insane endurance athlete as well.
I guess I followed the normal trajectory of fine dining when I first started out. So it was, culinary school, apprenticeship, like you mentioned. And I was fortunate enough to work at Union Square Cafe in the early 90s. It was sort of really on this path to go down this fine dining route and sort of figure things out as I go along, but also be, one of those chefs that I always looked up to. And so fine dining for me was the bar in which great food was made. And, I was super excited to be on that journey at a young age. And so I worked in some local restaurants in high school leading up to that, which was a, good sort of way to be introduced to the business. And then, like I said, found my way, at college and graduating, going to Paris, and just really opened my eyes to all the great things I wanted to see and be. Union Square Cafe, I spent 4 years there, had an amazing time, and was able to see a lot, learn a lot. And then also, when I finished my time at Union Square Cafe, Danny Meyer was, amazing in many ways. And one of them was arranging some employment for me in San Francisco. I always wanted to sort of go out there and, see all the things that were happening, which was really like farm to table driven, and Jeremiah Tower and Alice Waters and Joyce Goldstein. So I worked for a couple of those amazing chefs and got to live and sort of breathe what was important to them, which shortly, thereafter became important to me. And then returned back to New York, worked at Gramercy Tavern when they opened. And that was another amazing, opportunity to see the things that were building off of, where I was in my career at that point. And then it sort of, I was at this critical time in my life where I was torn because I loved the path of fine dining and restaurants, but I was trying to figure out how I'd be able to have those goals that were important to me in my life, as well as, the other goals in my life, which was, settling down, getting married, having a family, and having that sort of white picket fence in the big backyard. And I was challenged. So I looked at other areas of opportunity where I could go and continue on my love of food and people and sharing, those special moments. And I reached out to my mentor at the time, one of my mentors, and she had recommended I look down the road of the corporate dining route, which I knew nothing, very little about. And that's where, they were hiring at the time and still are, talented, driven chefs to go and do what they love to do and do it in a corporate structured environment. For example, corporate banks and, it could be universities and those types of establishments. And so I started to work for a lot of the big banks on Wall Street and eventually landed a job as the executive chef at Goldman Sachs' headquarters. And I was there for 8 years, loved every bit of it. There were a lot of amazing challenges, a lot of similar challenges of fine dining restaurant. There were new challenges. And I saw a lot of great opportunities there, which sort of led me on the path where I am now, which is to, try to cook some amazing, great quality restaurant style food in a very different, non-traditional setting, which would include a bank or a catered event and those types of things.
Yeah. And that's where we met, right? As at Goldman Sachs. And you were letting us use your kitchen, or there was something going on there. I forget what it was, but I think there was like 3 topics that I wanted to dig into today with you. One was, I got to talk about this endurance training thing because I have a million questions. And then obviously we'll talk about Shake Shack and the innovation kitchen and how that works. And then what I think is going to be, for me, the most sort of enlightening is just talking more about good food at scale. And when I think of you, that's the first thing I think of, just because when I see the food that you were able to put out at Union Square events and at that volume, and then now what you're doing at an even, bigger scale, it's tough, man. And I feel like you sort of cracked the code. I want to talk a bunch about that. But before we get into cooking, how did you get into endurance running, training? You've done Ironmans, triathlons. You probably wake up at 1 a.m. and, in order to run a marathon. Like, how did that all start?
It all started with just trying to be more healthy. And it was as simple as that. I obviously grew from there. But, as a young want to be chef going down that career, there's lots of demanding hours in the regimen of the job and the hours and the commitment and dedication. And all those things were, taxing on the body. And when you're young, you don't recognize it. You just kind of keep going. And I always loved all those parts of it, but I never felt myself as to being fully healthy to the level of which I wanted to be. And it wasn't until my wife and I were expecting our first child is when, I sort of hit the pause button and said, I want to commit myself to a more healthy person emotionally and physically. And now I have something more to live for, which is a family. And so I wanted to prioritize that. And I just thought, might as well go all in and sign up for a marathon and do the appropriate training. And that's kind of where it all started. And it just escalated from there. And the more I would...
Sorry, John, just back up first. A lot of people want to get healthy and then they go to the gym twice a week. You wanted to get healthy and you decided to run 26 miles in a race. Where's the sort of the jump there? And also around what age were you when you started doing this?
So it wasn't until I was in my young 30s, probably 32, when I sort of made the leap and said I wanted to run a marathon. And I think, you raise a good question. I would never have been accountable enough to just go and run around the block a couple of times. I tried doing those things, earlier on and maybe in my 20s. And, when I lived in San Francisco, I'd go for runs every once in a while, but there was never really any commitment. And I knew through my career and through my upbringing, my dad and my mom, and you would hear all the things about what complete dedication is. So if I was going to focus on doing something that I really wanted, which was maintaining a certain level of fitness, I just thought it was, for me, more important to, again, be accountable and go all in. And if I knew if I signed up for a marathon, which at the time, and I think still today, to run the New York City Marathon, you have to commit to running 9 races a year under their sort of umbrella, and that's how you qualify. So signing up to run those races would therefore, over the course of a year, require me to do the appropriate training form. And there were times initially I didn't do the right training form, and then you go and run a 10-mile race. And, after not having training, you get humbled really quickly. So I learned again, more accountability. And then that sort of allowed me to maintain, a schedule where I was being accountable for. And I loved that. And I needed that. And that was 20 years ago. And I'm still doing that. I still sign up for races because it's the best thing to hold me accountable.
Yeah.
And I've had a coach for years who, is amazing. And so all those things for me, it's no different than a mortgage, right? If you weren't accountable to pay a mortgage or pay your rent, you'd blow it off. And I would do the same thing with my fitness.
Yeah.
Now I know people who can sort of just get up and do and have a sort of certain way about them. And I applaud them for it. That's not me. And through this journey, it's just, I've enjoyed it and I've tried to stick with success.
Well, I mean, I think you're also leaving out that you also have a number of kids. So doing that while having kids is, I don't know how you do that. But you mentioned your parents. Are they of the same ilk? Like, where did that dedication come from? It sounds like your parents sort of, instilled you with this really sort of
Yeah,
deep sense of...
my mom and dad, are amazing. I'm fortunate to have them as long as I do and see them. And I've learned at an early age, all the sort of, cliche things about work and effort and commitment and perseverance. And my dad specifically has gone through, and my mom as well has gone through, medical issues through the years and certain things that I was able to witness for good and for bad. But for the good was having two amazing examples from which to live by. And I've watched them, go through, bouts of suffering and perseverance. And so they've been amazing role models for me from which to continue to move forward with my life. And my wife and I are doing the best we can to, share those lessons with our children.
Do your parents run as well? Do they compete?
It's interesting. They were not the sort of endurance athletes at all. They were busy, working multiple jobs and sacrificing for us. And then for me to sort of take on this sort of fitness part of my lifestyle. I'm fortunate enough, I'm a pretty good early riser. I don't struggle with getting up early. And so adding another hour and a half, sometimes more, sometimes less into that on top of that wake up call allows me the time to go and exercise and train. And so it doesn't really tap into family life or work life. I just want to make sure that I keep all my priorities in check. And although this is the top priority of mine, it can't supersede, family and work.
Yeah. Well,
and it doesn't.
That's no joke, man. I get up pretty early and my kids, for some reason, just know and get up earlier. They're earlier than I get up. But, training for a marathon, I can't imagine. The other thing I think about, especially we have a bias here, right? As chefs, it's like, are there learnings that you've taken from all of this training and endurance that you've sort of, transferred into the kitchen or vice versa? Things about like running a kitchen that have helped you be a better endurance athlete?
Yeah. I mean, as to be a chef, it requires an incredible level of endurance in its own right. And one must need to be physically capable to endure the rigors of the kitchen and of that life, right? You're standing on your feet for hours and hours. You're constantly on this pursuit of trying to improve, whether it's your craft or baking a cake. And that requires the self-motivation to endure that training that's required, right? I mean, I've peeled onions for hours. I've chopped things for what seems like years. And it takes a special individual to want to do that and find joy in that. And what I found through cooking is a joy that allows me to persevere without, someone looking at me from afar and thinking I'm crazy, which they may have done. But I find some sort of extreme comfort in that. And I didn't know that I'd find that in endurance training and racing. And then there are so many similarities with that as well, right? You're constantly repeating the same motion, whether you're running, you're biking, or you're swimming. It's monotonous. It's total lunacy for lots of people, and I get it. But I think for me as a chef and someone who wants to train for endurance racing, I enjoy the repetition and the comfort zone of doing the same thing over and over again with the goal of looking to be better. And in whether you're in a fine dining kitchen or anywhere else, if your goal is to be better, then you're always looking at the person in front of you, right? There's always someone behind you. And the goal and camaraderie that I've gotten in a kitchen is the same I get on a race course. We're all in there looking to move forward. And it's less about who's quicker or slower, but it's more about just sort of persevering and marching ahead. And so for those things, I feel fortunate to have that, sort of balance in both passions. Although, yes, it can be exhausting at times, but it forces me to eat better, right? To sort of be more prepared. And if you're not prepared in my job or out on a race course, then I'm not going to do well.
Yeah. There's definitely, I've been to a couple of races. There's a huge camaraderie there. Not that there isn't in a kitchen, but almost sometimes I wonder if it's just more, it's actually more competitive. Getting on the line in the kitchen where everybody wants, is vying for the, for that station.
I am not like a top race finisher. So to your point, yeah, there's a competition there, right? There's a lot of money at stake if you're going to go and win the Boston Marathon or an Ironman triathlon. That's not me. I'm a middle of the pack guy, just looking to, inch forward. But you're right. There is a tremendous amount of camaraderie and teamwork that happens, even though it might be deemed as an individual sport. You could say the same for chef life, right? So if you're looking to be a multi-Michelin star chef, there's competition, but within the day-to-day, there's a tremendous amount of camaraderie that I would believe, and I do believe that, could result better for you and the team around you if you're working together.
Yeah. Are there other chefs that you train with?
No, only because of like where I live and how early I get up, but there are other chefs, friends of mine, that participate in different races. I just got a Teams message from a friend of mine who's on our marketing team. She's running Chicago this weekend. And so that was happening. I have other friends that, are running New York Marathon with me that are in the business. I'm inspired by them. I'm encouraged by them. When I feel like quitting, which is often, then, I look to them, and I think others look to me, and really just try to branch the community out and pay it forward where we can, just in an effort to be a little more healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome, man. Well, it definitely sparks my...
We have to go running together.
Yeah, I know. I think we were talking about that book, Born to Run, last time you and I chatted. I try to go running barefoot once a week, and I really screwed up my foot last week. So I'm all shoes for a while. I want to jump into Shake Shack, if that's cool. And primarily, I want to focus on just R&D and the process of it. And you guys are in this innovation kitchen downtown. Pretty cool that it used to be Raquel, Thomas Keller's spot. I didn't know that. That's awesome. So just sort of digging into sort of the process of like ideation and things like that. Like, I'd love to know, how does the ideation process work? Like, where do the ideas come from? Like, how do you organize them and prioritize like what you're going to be working on at any given time?
The ideation process is, one of the most fun parts of the job, because that's where we dream big. It's sort of like that, 3-0 count. You can swing for the fence, trying to not remove any limitations, specifically scale, right? We don't want to limit ourselves to anything. So we think as big as we can, what can we do to, continue to build off the legacy of Shake Shack? How can we be better than yesterday? And those ideas come from anywhere, right? We stroll through green markets, we visit farms, we have shacks all over the world. So we've got team members on planes bringing back ingredients. So it could be something that we're inspired by, any restaurant of any sort of price point. It could be seasonally inspired. It could be a supplier sending us an ingredient that they're excited about. And, from there, we have a tight culinary team of, passionate people that are always sort of, and again, you talk about collaborating, you talk about being inspired by the people around you. So we're just constantly talking food and thinking of things that we can do to add to our sort of research and development timeline and sort of, processes in place. So we'll come up with an idea, and again, it could be from an ingredient or any of the things I mentioned, and then think about ways in which we can prepare it and build on our story. And we'll then start cooking it. And the first sort of step in the process is us just making it for ourselves. and then figuring how it can be maybe if it's just a sauce, for example, for like a burger or a chicken sandwich or an ingredient for a shake or frozen custard. We'll think of, what we can do to make it delicious. And is that something that we could work with someone on the outside to manufacture? Can our teams execute it the way we want at scale? And once we sort of check all of those internal boxes within our culinary team, we'll then present that to our broader team, which consists of folks from our marketing team, right? Because we want to make sure that, if we love the item, it can be marketed. We want to make sure from a supply chain perspective, we can source all the ingredients around the country or wherever it is that we plan on serving it. We have our quality assurance team. We want to make sure that from, a food safety perspective that, we're going to be able to deliver on our promise. And our operational team as well, who can ensure that we can commit on executing it at the scale in which we do. Oftentimes, lots of really great debates and collaborations, which can move the item forward or not. Yeah. It's maybe a done deal.
Before you were talking about kind of the rest of the process, right? So you have the idea, and then obviously, of course, you test it. You want to make sure it's scalable. You want to make sure you can source everything. But you said in the beginning that you start with like big idea first. Like it reminds me of, the famous story about Airbnb when they started and Y Combinator and the premise of do things that are not scalable at first. For example, they would visit every customer at their door to take pictures and learn what was working. And it sounds like, at Shake Shack, maybe the first part of the process is throw all the scale out the window. Forget about like, how do we do this in store? How will this work with this equipment or that equipment? Just let's come up with a really great idea and then work backwards to how to scale it. Is that right?
That's a perfect way of looking at it. I can't help but always think scale simultaneously, but you're right. So I don't think I do as good a job as explaining it because scale has been such an important part of my career over the last 12, 15 years. But, when I say think about, let's make sure to have no limitations. That's my way of sort of saying, let's put scale aside for a minute and make it great. Although I can never separate the two.
Yeah. Do you ever find that to be challenging? I remember when I used to have this restaurant group called Bark, and we had a bunch of restaurants, and I came from fine dining as well. But everything that we did, I think mistakenly, the food I think was great, but everything went through first this internal filter of how will we do this with 1,000 restaurants? But it was this handicap where it just made it much harder to create and innovate. And I think that in retrospect, the way that you're talking about doing it, even when it's Shake Shack, and I don't know how many locations of Shake Shack are, but there's a lot. When you start really big, it's easier to kind of chip away. And I bet even for you, it's hard because even when you're thinking about this crazy idea, you're like, yeah, but I know that will never happen. So do you find yourself like self-editing, like, forget that? Like
100%. Like it's a big part of the job. Again, we swing big, but we're also swinging realistic as well. So I'm not saying like, let's go and try to, have, for example, do our own butchering in the shacks or make our own sauce that gets, whipped eggs into it a la minute. That's not happening. But we think about how do we achieve that flavor of, maybe butchering or whipping our own eggs into a sauce, but then, and we'll make that sauce that way and we'll achieve that flavor. And then if we need to sort of quote unquote back into how we get it to taste that way, again, still using great ingredients, with sound technique, seasoning, all the sort of non-negotiables. How do we scale a sauce that way? For example, if it's hollandaise, we want the flavor of hollandaise. How are we going to do that where it's not going to have that 3-hour shelf life sitting somewhere warm when we know we need to keep hot food hot, cold food cold, etc. And that's an actual example, by the way.
Yeah, I bet. It sounds like you need Wiley DeFrain to come to it.
He'd be really helpful.
This podcast is brought to you by Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built. So the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mies is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before. And get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmees.com. The other thing I was really curious about is when you're creating this food, obviously, I'm assuming it's not created in this vacuum of you and your team taste it and then it goes out. Are you getting feedback from customers? Are you doing sort of any sort of live testing? Like
we do.
And is that before it ever goes to roll out? So like, for example, to get into the marketing team, are you getting it in front of customers in the upstairs? Because there's a Shake Shack above the innovation kitchen for anybody that hasn't been there. So do you use that Shake Shack as like the place to test any of these things out?
We do. We have, before an item gets launched nationally or elsewhere, we'll test that item in carefully selected shacks around the country. Many times, if not all, we'll include a West Village shack for the simple reason that it's really close by. My team and I are here every day. Our home office is here every day. They have heavy discounts for lunch and dinner, so they're able to taste it as well as the other shacks that we're serving it in. And then we'll get very real-time feedback from our teams. Again, making sure that, we can deliver on a promise to execute it consistently. Do our guests love it? We really want our teams to love it too. So there's a lot of, think about restaurant pre-meals with tonight's special.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of that we do at scale with our teams in terms of educating and training them on how to execute that with the goal of having them fully embrace and care deeply about what we do. So there's a lot of background as to why we chose that item, where the inspiration came from, et cetera. And then if our teams like it, we find more often than not those items will resonate better, sell well, be executed better. So obviously our team's a big part of the success of the overall item. And once those items are tested from anywhere from 30 days to 90 days, then we'll put it on our sort of annual calendar.
I imagine the team's also giving feedback on the execution, right? Like how easy it is to execute, or if there's challenges or, hiccups in the workflow somewhere.
100%. If our teams can't execute it or there are challenges along the way, instantly we address that. Because the last thing we want to do is ever implement something that's going to not only have a negative impact on that item, but subsequently it could be all of our other existing core menu items. So those are all non-negotiable for us. These are intended to be exciting menu additions to our menu items. And if they're not working well, then we'll address it immediately. However, the good news is we've been doing this a while, so we know how to sort of minimize challenges in advance of even a testing.
Yeah. How do you capture and collect feedback? Is there a tool you use, and then how do you sort of take that feedback?
Lots of different ways internally from our teams. There's lots of communications. We're well supported by a team of operational support folks that are collecting that feedback, to the minute. Internally, we have Teams chats, we have, daily calls, weekly calls. So we're never short on feedback from our teams, and then we're quick to assess and address them. And then from a guest perspective, we have QR codes everywhere in the shack, lots of the menus and collateral. So guests are, always welcome, and, we rely on their feedback as well. So they'll send that feedback, and that goes to a team of folks in our home office who will quickly disseminate that information to us as well to, make any changes we can.
Is it all qualitative feedback? Is there any sort of quantitative piece to it where you're measuring?
There's both. Yeah, there's both. And our team, our insight team, compiles a list of that information and shares it with us. And that's, gets broadcast internally, and, we super analyze those things.
Yeah.
And, from a financial perspective, from an ops lens, just focused on ensuring, again, that the best item could be represented.
Are there like evergreen metrics that every like new special has to, pass through, consistency or seasoning or things that get measured? And if they don't hit the mark, any of those that come to mind?
So we have a quality assurance team here that is an amazing part of our team that looks at all those ingredients and products, and we test for flavor, viscosity, temperature, size of French fries. I mean, we're always weighing and testing and scaling, and all that work is done in a shared space here in our innovation kitchen. And I've learned a ton from that team.
You do a lot of like chef collaborations as well. Like, how does that spark? Like, how do you think about which chef to collaborate with? And Is that more from the marketing perspective when they come in? And then when you do collaborate with these chefs, are they coming into the innovation kitchen?
Yeah. So collabs happen lots of different ways. And as you know, we're born from a fine dining restaurant. So we hold near and dear a lot of those core values. So those chefs and those businesses are our inspiration. We've never sort of planned it this way, but, they tell us that, they're inspired by us. So we're constantly keeping an eye on the industry and what the great ones are doing in an effort to be greater. So when we get the chance to collab with someone, it's a real exciting time, not just for me and my team here, but our teams in the Shacks. We actually had an event last night, which was a lot of fun. And those sort of, how we come about those collabs vary. We work with our marketing team and develop a strategy a year in advance. What's our goals and, who are we targeting and why are we targeting and where are we going to have these collabs? So that's one way. Another way could be, our founder, Danny Meyer, it's, making an introduction, or our CEO Brandy Grudy making an introduction. So they come at us at all angles. People are sort of hitting us up with DMs and, sending emails. And we love that. And we wish we could entertain all of them. But unfortunately, we have to focus and finalize less than what I think we all would like to do. But once we settle on who we're collaborating with, for me, I think what we've instituted a little more in the last few months is we have them come into our kitchen and we show them how we make our core items. Because although we don't want anything to be limiting or any great ideas to be limiting, we also need to be mindful and realistic of timing.
Oh, that's interesting. They learn how to do like the general.
Yeah. So we'll show them how we make all of our core menu items, because anything we collaborate with is built on our core. I'm sure if you've seen any sort of shared information on what we collab with, nothing shocks you and says, oh, they're serving something on, I don't know, a plateau de fruits de mer. Like that we don't do. We build off our core menu. So we'll show them how we make our core menu. We'll take them through the process, the steps, how our teams season things and how our equipment works, because that needs to be the base that's non-negotiable, right? And again, not trying to limit things, but we only have so much equipment and it needs to sort of plug and play, if you will. And then from there, we'll work with them to figure out what's important for them and what do they like about our ingredients and, how do they see and sort of playing into it. And then we'll start cooking. And it's as simple as that.
How long is that process usually once you have a chef brought in until there's a...
It could take as short as a week, depending on scheduling, or it can go longer than that. But generally, I'd say anywhere from a week to 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
After that is then your team taking that dish that you've collaborated on and operationalizing it and making it more scalable, or is it whatever that came up with in a week that's what goes live?
So if any of those collabs were to be on a larger national scale, then that time frame would be a lot longer, right? Because now we're going to execute it in a couple hundred Shacks. So that time frame would be longer. That could take several months, and it might even be a tested item as well. But for any of those sort of pop-up collabs that you may have seen where it's sort of in one location for one day, those can happen pretty quickly.
Yeah. You're not scaling white truffles across the country.
Well, we did scale white truffles. We did that nationally. We also did black truffles nationally. So that one took about a year and probably and a half by the time we developed it, scaled it, tested it, and then launched it nationally.
Wasn't there a white truffle milkshake?
So we did a white truffle milkshake. We did that at a couple of events, but we never served that one nationally.
Gotcha. What was the thing that scaled nationally with white truffles?
So it was we did 2 times. We did a white truffle burger that had some crispy shallots and fontina cheese. And then we did a black truffle burger that had Gruyere cheese on it as well.
Nice, man.
So those were national.
So, I mean, there's been obviously a ton of awesome collaborations and specials, but can you think of any dishes that you really loved that just didn't work out? Like either they didn't pass the, like execution phase, or people didn't, at scale, didn't like them. Anything that stands out?
We did a chicken parm that we tested at a bunch of Shacks that didn't work.
Really?
I was super bummed because, I thought it was like really approachable. We did everything we could to, in our own way to elevate it without seeming to be fancy in any ways. We used the Napoli tomatoes, which is an amazing plum tomato. It has great flavor. We, sort of made a sauce with pancetta and onions and garlic and extra virgin olive oil, a little Calabrian chili. And then we topped it on our crispy chicken And then we had fresh burrata. It was nice and creamy and some fresh basil leaves, and it was delicious. And
what's wrong with that? That sounds awesome.
I mean, I don't know. That's a great question. We analyzed it a lot to figure out, what the concerns were with it from a guest perspective. From an internal perspective, our teams were able to execute it well. So that felt great. But I love when those things happen too, because I think it has a life. So we're going to revisit that and look to bring it back in a way that resonates. And I may be striking out again, but we're going to try really hard. It's
so funny. Like, of all the things that wouldn't work, you think that's just like a no-brainer, red sauce Italian at Shake Shack. How do you go wrong?
Yeah, it was a surprise.
Any other dishes that maybe were really good, but just couldn't get, scaled?
We did what we thought was really cool and, maybe could resonate with a lot of our fans. We did these sort of layered beverages that had really great flavor. They'd come in a nice clear cup and you'd have these 2 layers of beverages where they pour half one and then the other half on top. And although delicious, not very scalable. We had the viscosity on, I think 2 of them figured out pretty well where it could work. Third one, not so much. And then after a bunch of internal tries, we realized we're not ready to even test this yet or launch it even in a single shack. But again, I think there's an opportunity there to revisit that soon.
So I have to imagine, that a lot of the new dishes that you're putting out, these specials, LTOs, is it more to build and maintain sort of the brand of Shake Shack, or are they intended to actually, to be measured on incremental revenue that they bring in? Are both of those things have equal value, or is one more than the other?
That's a great question. I guess that might depend on who you ask. I think I'll play it safe and say they're both equally important. But yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think they're both very important to us. And how we go about achieving that lots of times, is a challenge for us. And, there's a lot of really strong and healthy debates that happen when we look to decide what menu items that we know could scale actually make the menu and how are they going to perform. So there's a lot of different lenses looking at them and dissecting them to see what makes the most sense for our brand and is able to meet our financial obligations. And I wear my hat and I do my best to not just wear a chef hat, but I always say we try to think like our CEO, R&D Customer, because he ultimately has to make the most important decisions. That we in the innovation kitchen try to have a complete business mindset when we make it, not just I like chicken parm or whatever. And those decisions are critically important. And, fortunately, we've got lots of very smart people in the room to help us make those decisions. And I think we don't always make the right decisions, but I can guarantee you that we always try really hard to make that right decision.
Yeah. And to your point, especially with the scale that you have, sometimes a wrong decision is just as valuable because you learn so much from it. Like, I wonder why people don't like red sauce or chicken parm. And then you can learn. I want to sort of transition into your previous life because I think everybody can learn a lot about, how to execute, good food at scale at high, not just at scale in terms of like multiple locations, but just high volume. I did just want to, I don't know if this question makes sense, but just sort of tying a bow on what you're doing at Shake Shack. But obviously QSR is way different than fine dining, and there's a lot more engineering. It's almost a lot more science involved in terms of like how to make things work. But there's still cooking, right? But I'm always curious, someone that your background that's doing something, at a place like Shake Shack, what do you find to be the same? Like from your time in fine dining, what still feels the same about what you're doing? Obviously, you're creating new food, and that's a part of it. But anything else?
For me, I think people are people. And people have the same expectations and they want and expect value and believe it's my responsibility no matter where you're coming to my house for dinner. If we're creating the next LTO or I'm in a fine dining restaurant, it's my responsibility to over deliver on whatever those promises are. And so I try to take that mindset. And again, my experience is only my experience. And I've learned, fortunately, through the fine dining lens of all those sort of, values of importance, securing the right product, right? Fresh ingredients, expertly handled, properly seasoned, sound and timely cooking technique and top service, right? If you sort of institute that in the QSR world in the same approach and manner that you do in the fine dining lens, then I think you're going to be okay. And yes, there's challenges on both ends, right? You might be dealing with a tighter cost constraint on the QSR world, but you could still, buy a better ingredient than what one would expect. You may have to charge more. And that's the challenge, right? How do we do this? Maybe if you buy a better product and maybe it's manipulated less.
Yeah.
Or the sauce is one that can be made a certain way and executed a certain way. So there's so many similarities, and I would not be able to do my job had I not had the education in fine dining.
Yeah.
No different than, I think, if someone came from a very different QSR background and tried to go work in fine dining.
Yeah. I almost find, and I did find it, at least running, the restaurant group I had before all of this, QSR is it's actually harder because you can do the same exact food, but you have less optionality of things that, to your point, of things that you can do to that before you serve it. And let's just take Shake Shack. You could make an incredible boudin noir, in-house, and it's delicious and it's, moist and it's seasoned perfectly. And you put it on a bun and you put it in a paper boat. One, the price ceiling is way lower, right? You can't charge, more than $8, let's say, for that thing. Just
Sure.
No matter what, even though you would charge $25 for it in a fine dining restaurant. And on top of that, in a fine dining restaurant, you can aerosate that thing. You could hold it in seasoned pork fat to stay moist before you serve it. Obviously, you can add all kinds of you can control texture better because you can do it a la minute. And there's a lot more control you have, and you can charge more for the same exact boudin noir that if you did at Shake Shack in a bun and put, maybe even the same sort of condiment on top for a lot less price, and you have a lot less window of error. I imagine you must feel that as well, that sort of that challenge, because it's a lot more difficult in a lot of ways.
Well, you just made my job sound a whole lot harder than it is. But no, you bring up a lot of great points. You're right. I think this is my greatest challenge in scaling, and I'm fortunate to have this great challenge. And our job every day is to figure it out. And I think we're in the best position we can to do that. We've got the most amazing team and the resources are endless. We're just going to keep pushing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you talked about scale. Let's jump into good food at scale. Because prior to Shake Shack, I think for about 7 years, you were at Union Square Events, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody follows you, whoever follows you on Instagram sees the food that you were putting out there, but it's pretty insane. And I mean, you're talking about doing dinners for thousands of people. I think the same company also does some food for Delta, right?
Yeah.
Yep, among many other things. But, seeing the caliber of food that you put out at that volume, sometimes it's like, how the heck does he do that? What did you find to be some of the biggest challenges of putting food out at that scale, at that volume? And then, specifically, I'm curious if you had any interesting, solves for things that a lot of food is just best a la minute, right? Like searing a scallop, this one scallop at a time, and you need a perfect crust, and then it doesn't have a huge shelf life after that. What were some of the biggest challenges that you found? And then did you have solves for things like that? Because I don't think I saw, I followed a lot of the stuff that, cooking over the years, and every time I'm like, how the hell did you do 1,000 of those? There must be times when that came up when you were figuring out things to do a la minute.
Yeah, Union Square Events. I loved it there, and 7 great years spent there. I think my greatest challenge was knowing that the other businesses associated with Union Square Events were Michelin star restaurants, right? You have the Modern, you have Gramercy Tavern, Union Square Cafe, and and of course I had lots of amazing, wonderful nostalgia having worked at Union Square Cafe long before Shake Shack was born. So the greatest challenge for me was knowing that I had to compete at that level. So when I made the decision to go there, it was a non-negotiable as part of my decision-making process. It said, regardless of what we do there, it needs to be at that level or greater, or else I'm can commit to go and work there. And
did they know
at the
that,
time,
by the way, when you took
sorry?
that job? Did they know that was your mentality going
They
into
didn't
it?
know that. No, I think they may have sort of pieced it together shortly thereafter. And I would tell my team when I started that, we've got an amazing opportunity and an obligation to cook food at the same level as those restaurants. And that company was born from fine dining as a Shake Shack. Union Square Events, which was initially Hudson Yards Catering, was born out of the desire to cater to folks who wanted parties, weddings, galas, etc. It was Carrie Heffernan, who was the first chef of Union Square Events, who came from Madison Park. So there was a torch that was passed, or that I accepted to take. So building a team of dedicated, like-minded people in an effort to accomplish those goals was important. We had all this new business coming on. It was really exciting and daunting. So that was my greatest challenge coming into this challenge, but it really helped me. And the other thing I'd say about catering, when I started catering probably about 15 years ago, there was sort of this like unwritten rule of food not needing to be great that people wouldn't say, but they would say. And then I remember when I started catering, this was even during my years at Goldman Sachs, I would have people on my team that would say, "What are you doing? We don't need to do that. It's okay. It's 400 people. It doesn't need to be that hot. We don't need to do that a la minute." And I would hear these things, and at first it would annoy me. And then second, I would really start to think that maybe there's a road here, right? If I'm looking to continue to go down my career, then maybe there's something here, an uncharted territory of scaling food at a high level that I should go down. And so the more I was told no, the more I said yes. And I would challenge myself and my teams to do those things. And so after it was 8 years spent at Goldman Sachs, when I went on to Union Square Events, it wasn't being said by anyone there, but I think it was being felt by everyone, and including me initially. Oh my God, we have this 4,000 person seated 3-course dinner at Robin Hood. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it. We have a lot bigger kitchen from which to produce these sauces and things in than Gramercy Tavern, for example. And we have a lot of skilled team members here that worked at all these restaurants and other great restaurants in the city. And so before you know it, everyone was on the same page, and we would buy raw materials in and do the butchering. And, you go to talk about seared scallops. I learned pretty quickly, through trial and error, that you could sear fish and sear scallops and get things to be golden brown. And we would sear scallops on one side, in small batches, but lots of people doing that in small batches on one side. So it could sear nice golden brown, but we would sort of, as we would say, sandbag a bunch of sheet trays, sheet pans in the freezer. And then we pull out a sheet tray at a time. So then after you seared that scallop, you put it on an inverted sheet tray that was frozen just to, prevent the scallops from, continuing to cook, almost shock it, if you will, but not putting it in any liquid to have a negative impact on its flavor. And then we chill that scallop and all those scallops down. And then we'd reheat them in a steel box with sternos hours later that same day in an effort to, serve them hot and at the right doneness that we wanted, but that still maximizes flavor because of that searing process, for example. So that's one trick. There's so many. We would oftentimes have to serve several hundred people a salad first course that needed to be preset before they came into the room for, maybe there's a speaking arrangement happening and whatnot. And then I learned quickly, obviously can't toss the salad, let it sit for 25 minutes and then serve it and expect it to look like it did. But then I would I found a way to, make an emulsified vinaigrette, usually with a base of vegetable, just because it,
like a puree vegetable,
checks the box on all allergens. So, for example, if you're making a salad that had red wine vinaigrette, and the salad had parsnips and carrots in it, maybe there was parsnip in the base or roasted parsnip in the base of the dressing. So it's thick. It gives you more flavor from one of the ingredients. In this case, it would be, the vegetable. And then that dressing, if you will, / puree would sit at the base of the salad. And then you'd have your mixed greens that weren't tossed in dressing that were durable enough to sit on top of this thicker puree that was acidulated. So when a guest were to dig into it later, they dig down into it, scoop up the vinaigrette, and it wouldn't be compromised. But yet we'd spray it with a little olive oil just before it goes out, so it's glistening at the same time. So little things like that through the years. One of the interesting was my first week in USE, Union Square events. We were serving all the food for the pasta night, the night before the New York City Marathon, which is 20,000 people. So we had to cook 3 pallets of pasta. I want to say it was 300 pounds of pasta. It was excess of 300 pounds of pasta. And I didn't know what to do. I was with a new team. We were just, first time they all had to do it.
Yeah, swimming pool? And how did you cook that much pasta?
We were cooking them in the giant steel vats.
Yeah.
We're cooking the pasta, but we were using a salad spinner.
Like the Swiss braisers or like steamers? Like did you cook them in like Swiss braisers? Like
so we did use one Swiss braiser, but we also had 2 giant kettles.
Oh yeah,
that the giant
the 80-gallon.
That we would put the pasta in the plastic sort of salad spinner, the large salad spinners. So we put the pasta in there, dip it in water, and stir it with the metal ore. And then we would cool them out on sheet trays without shocking them in cold water. So we had tons of sheet trays. And then we would reuse the water twice, actually, just because we wanted to cook it fresh, but it all had to be done the day before. So it was some wild times and lots of great learnings. But again, our common goal was not to compromise. And I know that sounds crazy. And sometimes there were things we needed to do to sort of make it all work. But quality was always paramount. And I didn't realize that at the time. I had no idea that was sort of paving a path for me to get to a role, which is another sort of challenge on top of my previous
different
challenge.
kind of scale. Yeah. Was there any equipment that you incorporated, maybe that didn't exist when you started or that was there? Like hold mats or things like that help?
Proofing cabinets. Or those big steel boxes with the steel doors on top. They're critical ovens in the catering world that you would bring off site in a venue that didn't have ovens. So we would use them for not only the hot sort of reheating or cooking of food, but they would be great to organize and sort of store chilled food as well as, sort of separate them out between parties at any given day that were going out. But in terms of specific cooking equipment, I'd say what we've learned to be our greatest asset was a bandsaw, like an industrial bandsaw. So we would serve thousands of hors d'oeuvres and have like little ficelle croutons and buying fresh bread only to freeze it so you could quote unquote rip it on a bandsaw or cut them on a bandsaw would result in perfect size every time cuts of croutons for events. We would make hors d'oeuvres or like mac and cheese bites was a big one. We'd make mac and cheese bites and we'd build them into, high-end pastry pans, if you will, or cake trays. We'd freeze that and then we'd cut them in squares on a bandsaw so they're all perfect.
That's so interesting.
Cheesecakes would be made in giant sheet pans, large sheet pans as well. Fresh cheesecake, again, only to freeze, which would just give it the quick enough and cold enough chill from which to then cut them. And we would cut them in interesting ways and angles to maximize on the use of the item as well as to give it an interesting, more elevated look.
Did you have multiple bandsaws?
So at the Union Square events that was there when I was there, we had one bandsaw that was in full operation and almost going constantly throughout the day. And it's as loud as you would imagine. You know what a bandsaw is.
Yeah.
Clearly you've been in a butcher room. So we would use the bandsaw for all things exclusive of butchering, believe it or not. And now I think in their new facility, Square Events is in a much larger facility now. They have 4 bandsaws.
Gee, that's crazy.
When I went to tour. Yeah.
And we obviously at Tabla, we just did a dinner a couple nights ago for Floyd. And at Tabla, we had a bandsaw, but it was just for whole animals. And we would use the meat slicer to slice all kinds of stuff. I actually sliced my whole thumb off on cutting eggplant on a meat slicer. I don't think we ever actually cut meat on the meat slicer, but we would, obviously cut every kind of vegetable. I don't think we ever used a bandsaw for anything other than meat. That's crazy. I've never heard that before. That's so smart though, because you can control the angles and the size perfectly.
Butternut squash.
Oh, yeah.
Fresh butternut squash cut. I mean, we did mirepoix for Robin Hood Gala, which is 4,000 people. We celery root on a bandsaw. I mean, I don't care how good your knife is or how good your cutter is. I mean, perfect every time.
That's so smart. Wow. Very cool. All right. That's a big win there. Okay. You know what? I don't know how much you worked on some of the Delta things or some of the airline things, but I'm always curious because I've heard that Union Square Events obviously does work with Delta. I've heard that you have to cook food a little bit differently for airlines. Like you have to season it differently and things like that. Is there any merit to that?
It's interesting. We looked at that a lot in the beginning, right? So apparently whenever you're 30,000+ feet in the air, food is more bland and like this tastes less salty. And so I was told initially that, all right, we're going to go do this thing with Delta. You got to throw a lot of salt in the food. And like, of course, saying that to a chef, like, what are you saying? So we did a bunch of investigating and did a little research. And is there any merit in it? Maybe. But I also think it's not one that you can actually quantify to prepare for. I think the takeaway for me at the time was let's cook our food properly and let's season it accordingly, because of the sort of very minute chance that someone could detect less seasoning.
Yeah.
Wouldn't work for everyone. In addition to that, the solve is making sure that they have additional salt should they want to season their food at, like you would at any restaurant. So it just, if anything, it made us be better at what we do. Thanks for that. Let's look into it and let's make sure that, when we build our menus and cook our food, it's seasoned properly.
I don't even know how you would do that. Like, how would you mechanically over-season food? Like, okay, this tastes good. Now let me just understand exactly how much extra salt to add. That seems like impossible. I'd rather just have some Maldon salt at the, on the plane.
Exactly.
So I didn't know if that was like a wife still, but I have heard that a bunch of times. Sounds like maybe it is partially true, but you all just sort of went about your business.
Yeah, I think it's partially true, but
yeah,
let's just be better.
Awesome. Well, this was quite the experience. Hearing those stories. I'm curious that, obviously there's a bunch of chefs and restaurant operators and just anybody, people in the food industry listening. Is there anything else you want to share?
Well, first off, thank you. I think I'm a big fan of yours, and just watching what you've been able to do and share, and the people you've shared it with continues to inspire me to do what I do. I mean, I think,
thank you.
You're an asset to the industry, and you give folks a platform from which to share it and hopefully continue to encourage people to do what they love. And I think that's why I do it. You're not doing this because you don't love it. And I continually am inspired by the people that raise the bar. And there's so many people out there. And I'm just grateful to be part of the community. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate that. One last question for anybody that's looking to get started on their journey to be an Ironman or Iron Woman. I don't know if it's the same word, but any advice on how to get started?
Yeah, I think, again, I was never the one that could just go out and do something without having accountability. And if someone's struggling to get out there and do it, it's because they're not accountable enough. So I would say do whatever it takes. And, if it's not as easy as it is for me to go sign up for a race, then call a friend who's doing it. Find that encouragement any way you can. And I'll never forget, there was a friend of mine a long time ago that was looking to lose weight, and he wasn't doing well physically, and he wound up shedding a bunch of weight, and it sounded great, it looked great. And I asked him how he did it. He goes, John, I couldn't even walk from my house to the next house. And I said, the next day I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk down the block. And then another house. And then, and he just kept going a little at a time. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a long journey. I still struggle every day with things. I'm still motivated by others. And so if someone's looking to get out there and do it, find inspiration and accountability wherever you can. People reach out to me all the time, and I do everything I can to help them because those folks helped me. And and I'll continue to look for people to be inspired.
Have you ever listened to David Goggins?
Yeah, of course.
My wife gives me a hard time because at least 3 times a week, I'll play a couple of videos before I go to bed. I'm just like so pumped to get back up in the morning.
There's so many. I mean, we have access now. So many people. And he might not be for everyone, right? You and I might not be for everyone, but there's someone out there.
Yeah.
I really believe that. And if someone wants to get started, And I think you just need to knock on the right door, and the right person will let you in and put you on your path and help you on your journey. I think it's important. And I know for anyone that has gone on in that journey, they were so grateful for it, as I am grateful for my journey. I'm actually planning on running with a friend of mine in New York Marathon this year, who's 77 years old.
That's nuts.
I met him at the marathon 5 years ago. We've been friends ever since. And I've asked him his story, he's shared it with me. He's motivating me. And I just want to be with him on November 5th. And so I think I still need that inspiration.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. Yeah.
Just get out there.
People underestimate accountability. One hack I've done my whole life is I just tell everybody that I'm doing something before I've fully committed to doing it. Like when I was younger, I would say, oh, I'm going to Mexico. I would just start telling everybody. And then eventually I told enough people that I had to go because I told everybody. And so and same thing, I'm starting a company, or, you get enough people to have that sort of that healthy amount of accountability and pressure. It's a really good tool.
But I think you found within you what's going to work for you. And I think ultimately everyone needs to find out what works for them. I had one friend that used to make the trainer knock on his door every day because he wouldn't get up through the alarm, and then he wouldn't answer the phone. And, but he paid someone to physically take him out of the house. And if that works, who cares how you go about it, as long as it's doing what you want it to do. So
awesome, man. Well, this was a blast. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. I'm sure you have a bunch to get back to. Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.